It's just going away. Just let it go far. Nothing to move off on.
I need to put a
I didn't break everything. I can't roll. I didn't break everything.
Stay right there. Stay there.
Did you get it?
Yeah. Okay, now, roll it quick. Get rid of it. Tell him thank you. Ready for some breakfast?
Yeah. They want the lights on or off, Roy? I guess I might have let them on because they're out of those cords.
Not a lot there.
Now you're gonna get a lot more problems. So
It's crazy.
I know. I did this some years ago with a broken door, and he had to crack it off. I got the brand name on the red one. A lot of pictures just
What's that?
and I guess a good drive down the boat. Normally just use a wide angle.
The trick is surfing. You gotta surf.
Yeah.
It's better to listen than tell a story.
Miss it every year.
Hi, all both regulars and new faces. While we're waiting for the other two sections to arrive, I'll bore you with some of the gruesome details of this operation. You know about the East Broad Top Railroad. Everybody thinks that the East Broad Top Railroad is a steam railroad, and it certainly is that. But steam locomotives are a dime a dozen. We've got 6 of them. This thing, on the other hand, is the only one of its kind in North America, probably in the world, but certainly the only one in North America with its original machinery still in. So it's far, far rarer than any crummy steam. Anyway, I always say that out of earshot of Stanley Hall and Tom Holder, who's the engineer on the 14th. Anyway, this old car, you got the handout, was built in 26, so Lee Rainey, in his famous book, The East Broad Top Railroad, has a wonderful line, the exact origin of which I cannot explain. It says that the M1 was built in 1926, and after a series of frustrating delays, and nobody has ever been able to figure out out what the frustrating delays were, was actually put into revenue service in 1927. I have a feeling that some of the frustrating delays had to do with wiring problems, because there is a report of the car making a 2.5-hour trip to Mount Union from Orbisonia in September of 1926. It's hard to imagine taking that long to get to Mount Union unless you had some kind of intermittent malfunction. Anyway, probably the least expert capacity the EBT shops had was electrical design, and the car, as you know, was built at the EBT shop. So if I had to hazard a guess, and that's all it is a guess, was that the series of unexplained delays had to do with wiring problems. But the car was put into revenue service in January of 1927 and was deemed a huge success. And frankly, I still think it's a huge success. Anyway, this is its 75th birthday year, at least in terms of operation. And so we're making a big deal out of that. There'd be no cake on the pilot, please. But for a machine of this level of complexity, when you think about it, steam is among the most simple of machines. The steam engine is among the most simple of machines. You burn a fuel in an open furnace, you boil a working fluid, in most cases water, although not everybody uses water. Some people have used, remember the fellow Denny Newton worked for, the aviator?
Lear?
Yeah, Bill Lear. Bill Lear built a steam engine that used hydrazine as a working fluid, which scares the daylights out of me.
Also rocket fuel. Yeah, hydrazine's also rocket fuel.
Yeah. Either it goes one way or another. Anyway, steam is a very simple principle. You boil a working fluid, in most cases water, and you make the boiled working fluid push a piston back and forth, or two in the case of the steam locomotive. This thing is at the other end of complexity. This is an internal combustion engine, a spark ignition internal combustion engine no less, and an electric transmission. If you had looked at the prospects for this kind of technology in 1910 or 1915 or even 1920, you'd have said, oh, that's a crazy solution to railroad problems. Railroads are dirty and heavy, and their maintenance people are famous for using implements like hammers and tongs. A thing like a gas electric is never going to work out. Well, everything you see pulling freight trains and passenger trains on the railroads of the world today, with rare exceptions, is an internal combustion engine and an electric transmission. It's an improbable solution, but it's the one that has proven to be the most useful. The electric transmission is a great idea, better than the hydraulic automatic transmission in your automobile. This thing doesn't creep when you put it in idle. Your automatic transmission car creeps if you take your foot off the brake, unless you put it in park. That's why they put the park in the transmission options. Electric drive is efficient. If it fails, the working medium, the electrons, don't all run out on the ground. The Germans outfit called Krauss Maffei, did I pronounce that even approximately right? Built a diesel hydraulic locomotive, which the Southern Pacific experimented with back in the 60s. And that's a complex solution too. That's a diesel and internal combustion engine. It's turning, in this case, a hydraulic pump and pumping a working fluid, which does run out on the ground when the hoses break, and therein lay part of the problem. The Southern Pacific didn't own enough hydraulic fluid to keep those things working, and they eventually all went to scrap way before their time, had they been diesel electrics. In Europe, where there's a different level of field maintenance, the diesel hydraulic locomotives were a big success. But in this country, where the hammers and the tongs got to them, the electrons don't run out of the wire when you break it, but the hydraulic fluid does run out of the hose when you break it. So, anyway, thank you all for your patience. You're all very forbearing listening to this lecture, being trapped in here with chains across the doors. We can't get out. If you have questions about the thing,
Is it operated, how long has it operated since 1960? Is it operated continuously, or?
I'm real hard of hearing. I'm sorry.
Has it been out of service since 1960, or?
This car?
Yeah.
This car was out of service when I got involved with the East Broad Top in 1962. It was out of service because it was an orphan. There were 6 steam locomotives and there was only 1 gas electric It was actually a fairly easy car to maintain when the East Broadtop had a bus line, because it was a gasoline spark ignition engine, and so were the buses. And so they had auto mechanics on the premises who tended to the thing. But when the bus line failed at the beginning of the Second World War, this car fell under the aegis of the steam mechanics, and with all due respect to steam mechanics, they didn't do it any favors. So when I first saw it in the early 60s, it was out of service and inoperable and had been hammered and tongued pretty seriously. It had John Deere spark plugs in it, for God's sake. The person who put them in figured out that they had the right thread and they would plug up the hole. Beyond that, they were not the right spark plug. It has magneto ignition. Magnetos are not intuitively obvious to operate or to time. It has updraft carburetors, ditto. It has 4 valves per cylinder, ditto. It has electric transmission, ditto. You know, there are a lot of things that were not obvious. And so, if I may be so immodest, I brought a lot of those weirdo specialized talents to restoring it. And we started restoring it. We being mostly people from the Rockhill Trolley Museum. A fellow named Pete Patterson and Todd Crowell and I in the beginning. And Pete and Todd over the years have lost interest in it, but I'm still here doing this. And so the car, because it is old, and because parts are extremely hard to find, it is an ongoing restoration. It will never be finished. It's reliable to the point now where we can take it down the railroad as we have just now, and take it back without too many surprises. Although surprises are still not unheard of, so that's why it has couplers on both ends.
When was this last in service on the railroad when it operated as a common carrier?
They ran this car right to the bitter end.
They did?
Yeah, into 56. In fact, it may have made, and this is apocryphal and I don't have any documentation for it, it may have made trips over the East Broadtop's main line after steam was out of operation, because the East Broadtop shops at Rockhill did a considerable amount of machine shop work for the refractory brick plants in Mount Union. And some of those refractory brick plants shipped things that were unhandy to put in a truck and could be put in here. I have heard stories from a couple of different fellows. An old fellow named Drew Collier claimed that this car ran to Mount Union on machine shop support trips. Not very much longer than the revenue operation, of course, because with no maintenance on the railroad, the track rapidly, in places at least, got unruly. And besides, I don't know whether they kept the staff on to run it. A few of the staff that were kept on at the machine shop were also qualified to run this car. But when they left for better jobs with better futures, then the car was parked. And it was parked certainly from the middle of 56 till I saw it in 62. Anyway, sooner or later, another couple of trains ought to arrive. Yes,
when was the first year that you ran this for the spectaculars, the winter?
Well, we ran it long before when there were winter spectaculars or fall spectaculars. I ran it first in 1964, just to see if it would run, because up to that point we weren't sure. Here comes 14.
I rode it in '69, the winter of '69, so that's when I first rode it.
We operated it first down to the Pogue Trestle, which you can't do anymore, but which you could in those days, in 64. And we actually had a fan trip with it of Rockhill Trolley Museum people in 66. We took it down to the Pogue Trestle and flew right up to the edge of the trestle and went down into the ravine. That was as far as we went with the bridge timbers were getting pretty ugly by then. And then it's run in all the winter spectaculars and more or less continuously.
1976, maybe not. There are rumors that the building was built after a fire in 1882. The reason I have a little trouble with that story is there are no mentions of this fire in any of the local newspapers at that time, of which there were several papers, of which copies still exist. There are no mentions in the railroad's records. There are no mentions in the inspection reports from the state agency that inspected railroads at that time. This has the smell of a legend that got confused with the well-documented fire in 1908, which burned down another building that stood right over there. So maybe this building was built in 1882, we don't know. But we do know for sure it was here in 1890 because there are clearly datable pictures in that period. Those pictures show the 6 stalls at this end of the roundhouse. And in fact, when you go out, if you take a look up at the lintel between the 6th and the 7th stall, you can still see the seam very clearly there when they added onto it. The bricks were probably made here locally in a brickyard that stood just below the coal tipple. The first road crossing down there, it's a dirt road, now country road, was known to the old timers as Brickyard Crossing. And there were some local folks who burned bricks there just in a kind of a heap type of process, no actual kilns, but it was apparently how they supplied bricks to many local buildings. If that's indeed the case, the bricks have held up reasonably well. You can see some signs of problems over here, but this building is in general pretty good shape from a brickwork standpoint. At the turn of the century, the roundhouse was extended by adding the 2 additional stalls. The railroad was doing its peak business from the 1900s through the 1920s. They had a number of locomotives in operation. They added additional stalls down there. There was no lean-to over there until the 1920s. In the 1920s, the railroad began to feel the impact of automobile traffic, and passenger service really began to taper off, so they figured if we can't lick them, we'll join them, and they went into the business of operating intercity buses. And actually had a bus line that ran from New York State down into Winchester, Virginia, passing through Orbisonium. And the buses were garaged here, actually in a wooden building over there by the creek. Also in the building was the operating vice president's Packard automobile. And one day the bus garage burned down and also destroyed the automobile. And obviously at this point it became a management priority to have fireproof storage for the motor vehicles. So they built the brick lean-to over here. That originally was a bus garage. After they got out of the bus business, it's been used ever since for some of the motorized equipment that they use just to keep the railroad going here. That's kind of the history of the roundhouse. The turntable over here, we know that this is the 3rd turntable. There is a well-documented picture from about 1876 that shows first number 4 on a wooden turntable. Unfortunately, the photographer is standing in such a way that we don't know whether this building was right behind him or not. Okay? We know from the newspapers that that turntable was replaced, and there are photos that show the replacement was a Sellers cast iron turntable with very common design, about 50 feet long, a very large side beam casting that had big circular cutouts in it. It was a design that was widely used in the second half of the 19th century. And then when the Mikados came, they installed the current turntable. That turntable is actually operable by air. You can hook it up to the air tank on the locomotive and rotate it by air power, but as you may have seen just a moment ago, they no longer do that. As far as I know, that's never been done, in fact, since the line entered the tourist service. It's usually just pushed around. And if you see them put the locomotive on there at the end of the day, they very carefully balance it right centered, so it's perfectly balanced on the front bearing. 2 people can turn a 60-ton locomotive without any trouble.
What size is it?
No, it's longer than 50. I'll tell you the truth, I don't know off the top of my head. The roundhouse originally was used for minor repairs as a full erecting floor with drop kits and so on over in the car shops. But since, again, tourist days, all the repair work has been done on locomotives here in this building. They do use one of the pieces of equipment over there, the one that spreads the end of the flues over in the shops, but in general, the work that is done on locomotives is all done over here at this point. Let's take a walk back and we'll take a look at what's been happening with locomotive work this summer. remember again, the basic safety rule, do not fall in a pit, okay? Keep an eye on it. Other than that, if you get a chance, sometime while you're here, walk around outside and just take notice how many of the windows have had repairs done right under the window where something punched through. Old timers say this had something to do with the leaky throttle number 16. Don't know if that's true or not, but that's the legend. Come on over here. We'll take a look at what's going on. This is number 15 here. It is loud and naked, and you will never see a logo with the face. What's happening? For many years, these trucks operated under the regulated Pennsylvania truck transportation and complied with all of their weather regulations. 2 years ago, somebody can probably tell me exactly when this was. It was a terrible weather explosion on the Gettysburg Railroad. And as a result of that, the Federal Railroad Administration became interested in tourist railroad speed boilers. The East Broad Top is one of the topics of their interest. And in fact, what they require now is that locomotives be totally stripped down. They have an ultrasound test machine, which is the grid that's chalked on the side of the locomotive is what's used for that testing process. And with these techniques, you can identify boiler problems and address them. The work has been going on this locomotive all summer, using these Broadtop's own people as well as help from the Strasburg Railroad, which is one of the main repositories of steam locomotive expertise now. The Strasburg folks say that, considering the age, the locomotive is in pretty good shape. The work that needs to be done, this flue sheet at the front, the thing with the holes in it, that holds the flues that run the length of the boiler, is going to require some repairs both in the front and the back. They'll put new tubes in, new flues, which is normal maintenance on a steam locomotive, needs to be done periodically under anybody's regulations. And then also some work required on the firebox here, and that will put number 15 back in service. In fact, they had hoped to have it running this weekend. Well, obviously they didn't make that. The flues are sitting out there under the tarp out in front, and they're forging ahead to get the locomotive back in service. After that, numbers 12 and 17 will get the ultrasound treatment, and they'll determine what needs to be done there. And the plan is to bring them back in service also, and then number 14 comes in for its maintenance. This actually is very typical of the way steam railroads operated in olden days. These Broadtop, for example, we know from surviving records, always had one locomotive under repair in its shops at all times. It was just normal practice to continue to do this type of maintenance on a steam locomotive. You have enough blacksmiths and some guys who can make some iron castings and a good machine shop. A steam locomotive never wears out. It's like, you know, the axe has had 2 new heads and 3 new handles, but it's still the same axe. Same thing with the locomotive. They may replace a lot of parts over time, but the basic locomotive continues to keep running. And incidentally, it was a very funny joke, and not a single person here laughed. So you've really hurt my feelings here. And even that didn't get a laugh. Come on. Can we lighten up here? Lighten up, please. Okay. Tough audience. Thank you very much. A tough audience. The locomotives here today, there are 6 Mikados. Number 12 is the smallest. Number 14 and 15 are medium-sized and essentially identical locomotives. 16, 17, and 18 are all roughly the same, although 17 and 18 are a little bit different from 16. They weigh about 500 pounds more and so on. The East Broadtop, when they began operations, started out with a pair of very small 260 Vogels. When they went into freight operation on a serious basis in 1874, they were running 3 consolidation engines, also built by Baldwin. The first 3-foot gauge 280 consolidations in use in this country. They added a much larger consolidation in 1881, a couple of much more powerful 260s, numbers 5 and number 9, 3 460s, and that basically took them through the turn of the century. In 1903, the Denver Rio Grande was the first navigation in this country to deploy a new innovation that was just starting to be popular on standard gauge railroads. And that was the idea that you put a trailing truck under the firebox, so you can now have a much larger firebox much greater steam generating capacity, much more powerful locomotive. The East Broad Top was also at that time very interested in following new developments in terms of rolling stock, throughout the industry, as well as some of the things like their work with concrete bridges and so on. They were, basically keeping pace with what the railroad industry in general was doing, and they bought their first locomotive with a trailing truck, the Prairie 262 number 11. Liked it quite a bit, and then had Baldwin build number 12, the first of the Mikados. That was followed by the two 14 and 15 when they opened the Rocky Ridge branch, and then finally the three large 16, 17, 18. When 16, 17, and 18 were built, they were the largest narrow gauge, most powerful narrow gauge locomotives in this country, and held that title for a number of years until they were surpassed by the Denver Rio Grande K36 and 37. And put together the M2, which was the ugliest piece of equipment probably ever to run on the East Broad Top or most other places as well. It was a total disaster from a mechanic reliability standpoint, ran about 2 years, spent most of its time being repaired, and has never been heard of again. So there were a few dead ends here in terms of East Broad Top motive power, but in general they did an excellent job in terms of bringing in the best equipment and keeping it running. The machine shops here were totally equipped to maintain these locomotives, and in fact routinely did all repairs on locomotives here in Rock Hill beginning about 1880. Prior to that time, when they had heavy repairs, they'd send a locomotive back to the builder's plant in Philadelphia. The locomotives differ quite significantly in terms of their pulling power. The three largest locomotives, 16, 17, and 18, were rated for 22 cars, empty cars, going up the mountain from here to Robertsdale. The ruling grade there begins right around Saltillo. It's about a 2.25% grade, all the way up the mountain and around 17 curve up to Robertsdale. The combination of heavy grades, sharp curves, meant that 22 cars was all the big engines could pull. Number 12, the smallest, was rated for something like 15 cars. So all the pictures you see in later days typically show one of the three larger locomotives with a very standard train length, because they had found over the years that was the most efficient way to operate. They could haul the most traffic with the fewest dollars expended on train crews. North out of Robertsdale, obviously the first part is all downgrade, but there's a ruling grade south of Rock Hill, about a mile south of here, Jordan Summit, which was the heavy grade you had to get over coming this way, and then leaving town here, the ruling grade north of Rock Hill is where the tourist train goes under the overhead bridge, McMullen's Summit. That's the heavy grade going north. In fact, the larger engines could take 40 cars from Rock Hill up to Mount Union over McMullen's Summit. And in fact, many of the pictures in later years show the yards here with cuts of loaded hoppers. They would make a turn between here and Robertsdale, bring down, two cuts, then the locomotive would take both of them together on up to Mount Union. An old-time conductor told me once that one time they tried to see just how many cars they actually could pull with one of the big engines. They put 60 loaded hoppers on one of the large engines, left Rock Hill. They made it to Mount Union, but apparently they were going so slowly and they were so close to the edge in terms of stalling, they never tried that again. The standard train was typically just over 40 cars. The locomotives that were in operation at the end of the tourist service included only the 6 Mikados. The Prairie went somewhere, and it's another one of these Broad Top mysteries, somewhere during World War II. There have been numerous reported sightings, no proof as to where it went. It went into a scrap heap, or it went to some strategic railroad somewhere around the world that was involved in the war effort. The last of the small engines, one of the Moguls and one of the 10-wheelers, were taken out of service in the 1920s. So the big engines here were the ones that closed out freight service on the railroad. Since the end of tourist operations, the beginning of tourist operations, 12, 14, 15, and 17 have operated. 16 and 18 have never been in operation. 14 is in operation right now because it had a major overhaul in the late 1980s and actually is in the best condition of the locomotives that have been generally operating. That's kind of the story of locomotives here. Any questions that I can answer? Anything we haven't touched on? What do you want to ask about?
Just throw a question out. I mean, I was just thinking about the different grades and trying to picture in my head where it is in proportion to the railroad. Did the EBT ever look into electronic helpers?
The East Broad Top actually, in the early days, there was a helper station in Saltillo. Now we're talking 1874. There was an engine house and a Y at Saltillo, and there was apparently an engine base there. And from everything we can determine, they tried double heading on the mountain, going up into Robertsdale. Now this is the days of 10-ton cars and locomotives that maybe could haul 5 or 6 of those 10-ton cars on that type of grade. So there was double heading at that point. They stopped doing that about the time that number 7, the big consolidation, came, and apparently that was the reason they no longer felt that was necessary. The engine house was torn down, the Y was torn up, although they put the Y back used later for other purposes once they started all the canister work out of Saltillo. But except for that brief period early on, the East Broad Top in general does not seem to have operated with helpers. Now there was a study done in the early 1950s to dieselize the East Broad Top. And the paperwork actually still exists from General Electric Corporation. They proposed some little 25-ton diesels. And their idea was if you ran 2 of those, they were end cap diesels, you ran them back to back, so you had essentially a center cap type of hookup. And those were going to become the road engines. In fact, that never happened. The East Broad Top looked at it. Yes, it was obviously going to be considerable savings. Unfortunately, no, we don't have the cash money to buy the diesels to begin with. Thank you for your input. And a few years later, the railroad was abandoned. So we never actually saw diesels, and that's probably a good thing from the railroad standpoint.
Do we know why 16 and 18 were never run in tourist service?
That's actually a very good question, because number 16 was apparently one of the last engines to come out of the shops at the end of common carrier operation. And the best answer I can give is that they're considerably heavier than the other locomotives. That means more. For a long time, the railroad was subsidized by the coal that came from the coal leases on Broad Top Mountain. After the Rockhill Coal Company quit, a couple other companies operated some of the mines for a number of years, and that paid a lot of bills in the early days, the difference. In years after that, the railroad has kept going from things like, at one point, they owned about 3/4 of the houses in Robertsdale, and they collected rents on them. They gradually sold off the houses, and that made some money to keep things going. There's no coal being leased now. There's no houses left to sell or to collect rent on. Things are tough here right now. There are many times when I've come here and I've gone away thinking that was the last time that I'd see it run. We've been working here this summer. I'm just looking around who's here. Ben was here. Where did he get to?
Right here.
You want to know if there he is. There's been a group of volunteers working here this summer. And that really has made me much more optimistic than I've been in a long time. As nearly as I can tell, and this is not an official number, but just from looking at what goes on, it looks like if you take the number of people who work for the railroad, 5 days a week times 8 hours a day, the number of months they work here full time, and you subtract from that the amount of time they spend running the train, it looks like they've been able to invest about 6,000 hours this summer in working on locomotives and doing other types of maintenance to keep the thing running. The volunteer team has contributed just over another 1,000 hours. So that's another 17% of things that didn't fall down and rot and disappear forever. The cooperation that we've had from the railroad in doing that volunteer work and the attitude with which they've approached it has really given me a great deal of hope. Every conversation I have is, when number 15 is back in service, we'll get the other ones fixed. After the new coaches are running, we'll work on the other coaches. Plans that reach out years into the future. All the discussions in terms of volunteer work, next summer we'll do so-and-so, and then we'll do so-and-so after that. And, anything you need here, if you need to borrow any of the tools, tell us, just put them back. If you need any of the materials we have, take anything you need from the stock shed, use it in your work, you know, do what you think needs to be done to keep the place, you know, trying to hold together. The attitude here right now is enormously positive, and it's enormously determined in terms of keeping the thing running. I will tell you that we sure could use some additional help with some of the work that we've been doing. The volunteers here have done some track work. They've done a great deal of carpentry work. We've done some foundation work in the car shops where it was actually kind of interesting. In the course of the summer, on 3 different occasions, people have come up kind of shamefacedly and they said, you know, I remember the time that we rammed the caboose into that door and really damaged that severely. You know, they didn't want to really talk about it out loud, but we found 3 different cases where trains hit the end of the car shop. In one case, it completely destroyed what's above the door. That's just hanging up there by complete, you know, act of God right now. And the vertical post that supports one of the car shop doors has been knocked about 2 inches out of its location and also broken. This is a piece of 14-foot long, 8 by 8. So this, whatever hit this, hit it pretty hard. We thought we could replace that, fix that, until we found that the foundation under it had also been damaged. So we've replaced the foundation. Now we're ready to put that beam back in place and fix the overhead doors, and we'll have that part of the car shop available again to store the rolling stock during the winter. But we could use some help. We've had 37 people work here this summer. As I say, we did over 1,000 hours. And the sales pitch here is we're going to be working some more this winter. There's some terrible leaks in the roof over in the shops that need to be fixed now, or parts of it are just plain going to fall down. We're going to be working here next summer. The railroad is already planning the work they want us to do next summer. We'd love to have you help us. So I've got here some cards. If you'd be interested in possibly working with us, let me give you some contact information and be happy to have you join us. People say, well, you know, I really don't know much about restoring old buildings. There's the dirt, this is a shovel. Would you dig that dirt out of that hole? Okay, I can use that kind of help. We've got plenty of people that we can put to work doing that kind of work on some of the foundation work that needs to be done. One of our most active volunteers has worked here all summer. He's one of the guys who's put in the most hours. He did all of his work from a wheelchair. So if you've been feeling kind of poorly and not as spry as you used to be and so on, I'll have you go report to Bud and he can put you to work. And we've got something that anybody can make a useful contribution here, and it's a heck of a lot of fun to be able to come in here and the railroad says, here's the key, go in any of the buildings you need, take anything you want, just put it back when you're done, make sure nobody gets hurt, and work on these things. That's an awful good feeling, and I think everybody who's done that has learned an awful lot about these broadtop that they never knew before, and it really gives you a real good feeling about the possibility this is going to be around in the future. Do you have anything to add from your standpoint?
100%. Very exciting.
Are there any more rumors in terms of, I haven't been down here in a while, so the work with the non-union connecting railroad, and eventually there's been talk of possibility of going up to meet them and extending operations to them.
There has indeed been talk about that. We actually have an invitation, the volunteer group, to work on the Mountain Union Connecting Railroad this winter, spiking the narrow gauge rail back into gauge. If the railroad ever connects with that, that's a good thing. If it doesn't, it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, that's kind of the opportunity here in terms of volunteering. So, be happy to have some folks, join the team, work with us. How many people here are members of Friends of East Broadtop? A lot of people. Okay. Thank you for what you've contributed in terms of dues and the fundraising operations. We spent about $3,500 this summer in terms of materials for the restoration. I'd be happy to show you where every one of those nails got pounded in. It made a real big difference in our ability to help hold some of the parts of the railroad together here.
Wilson belonged to Stone Mike's grandfather was M.H. Taylor, and he owned one of the coal mines here in the place. And his name is he works with the
Right. Weaver was another cooperator up there also.
That one's from South Carolina. And I was looking through some of his old letters. They're dated in the 1920s. I thought I had some here from Paul. Like, Bernie Long was one of my direct ancestors. Hold up. The Long. Yes, he was. And my great grandfather was Jacob Long, who's a Civil War veteran. And so Bernie was his son, so it would have been cool, Mike. But my grandfather, M.H. Taylor, married Almeda Long, and she was Jacob Long, who was born in 1920.
Both live in that one, right?
There. Oh, yes. We actually know the residents of those.
We have to talk, absolutely. I have some things I think would interest you, and things like you have to think. I love
Well, I'm here, whenever you have time.
I was actually thinking of getting to
Absolutely, absolutely. I have, all letters and, here's I thought I had the ones from Coles, but they didn't get in that. They're all from, now, here's something that'll blow you away. My aunt, my grandmother's sister was never married, and she was Ernie's, when Ernie was little, she was his, this is a station master, she was his, babysitter. A lot of times the older sister of his mother and so on. So that was when she was a little girl. Now when she was in her 80s, she was my babysitter. So Bernie and I.
federal government recently imposed some new regulations